So I'm Chris, and you are here for React versus Angular versus Vue. So yeah, we will see who wins. We have two sponsors, Launch Fishers. They provide the space for free, so thank you to Launch. And then Amplify Docs is my new thing I will talk about for 2 seconds. If you use Storybook or Docs Z or Style Guidist, what we do is we let you share that with your whole team. And we just launched that, and so we're looking for early trial people. So you can go to amplifydocs.com or talk to me if you want to try that out. All right, so intros. I like to go around and just have everyone say like their name. I think it's good for everyone to meet each other. And then since we're talking about React and Angular and Vue, if you want to talk about any experience you have with those, like a level of experience, that'll help me kind of gauge what your interest level is or what your experience level is. So I'm Chris. I am a consultant. I also do Amplify Docs, which I just talked about. And I have a lot of React experience and not very much Vue or Angular experience. So I'm going to be telling you about all three today. So I won't hide the ball. I like React, but hopefully I can be objective. So
I'm Lawrence Horn. I mainly use React. I really enjoyed that, more experience with that, do freelance work. I've done Hello World and Vue and nothing in Angular. So.
I'm Dave. Mainly work with React as well, and just kind of interested to see what the difference is.
My name is Boaz. I too just use React mostly, but thought I'd see what Angular and Vue has to say about the subject.
I'm Dave Massaro. Just attended some seminars on all these, but don't use them yet.
Dave Jones, consultant with Fretless, and use React quite a bit, use Angular quite a bit, both the old stuff and the new TypeScript stuff. I've not used Vue.
I'm James Bush. I'm a developer turned developer. It's a consultancy. I've worked mostly with React of the three, and worked with some old Angular code.
I'm Austin Stelzkus. I did old Angular back in the day, switched to React several years ago, and I know that.
I'm Victor Connecto. I'm mainly C# and C++ programmer, but I maintain a very large front end that's written in React and wrote unit tests and debugged it. So that's kind of my experience over there.
My name is Sani. I'm very new to JavaScript. Say I'm most comfortable with React and to see what other frameworks are.
David O, application developer a little bit here. We use a little bit of JavaScript on this one. Just introductory.
I'm Chase, front-end engineer. I have worked professionally with AngularJS and Vue. I've done little, just get used to it, kind of simple to do kind of apps with React.
My name is Cody. Recently graduated at 1150, which is a boot camp station here at Launch. We did the JavaScript cohort. I've worked with React and Angular. I haven't touched Vue yet.
George Brown, Internet One Cause. Mostly working with Angular now, but I have had some experience with React.
Christian Johnson, about the same level as my friend Cody over here, graduated from 1150, have beginner experience with React and Angular, but not with Vue.
Kyle, I also have the same story. I went through the 1150 JavaScript cohort, learned some React and Angular.
And I'm Jeremy. I got a couple years of Angular 2 through 7 now, I think. Yeah. Played around with React a little bit. I'm gonna hate myself for saying this, but a little bit that I played with it. I actually like React better than Angular, and I haven't touched Vue yet.
My name is Gabriel. I went to 1150 Academy. I was with the Java cohort. Also done a little bit of WordPress. Right now I'm actually not coding. I'm doing IT for IU Health and code source.
Doug Mann, I'm a Drupal guy, looking up Drupal things there right now. But I had to architect a solution for Southern California Edison that launched just a few months ago, and we chose to go with a progressively decoupled site with Drupal on the back end and Drupal on the front end mostly, but never a page involved customers logging in. I did not want 15 million users logging into a content management system for PHP. So we went stateless for that, and Drupal puts React Code on the page, and lets them have a single block application, a little block that's routed and rerouted, and they pay their bills, add credit cards, look at their usage, blah, blah, blah. So it's a great marriage of Drupal and React. So I'm keeping my finger on the pulse of what's going on over here. Chris is awesome for that.
My name is Tony Boletto. I also went to the coding bootcamp, but it's the one up in Chicago for the Stack Academy, and I just did React. So I'm interested in those as well.
Anthony Panazzo, one of the co-founders of Livin. We're helping companies scale their engineering teams. So we've done some work in all of these technologies. I mostly done React, and I did like Angular 1 back in the day, so I probably don't know any Angular at this point.
I do what we call a local Angular, and right now I'm using Jim Derinsky, and I have JavaScript experience, but none of those frameworks. I'm Kyle. I probably have years of React, weeks or months of Angular, and days of Vue.
The people who came in, do you guys want to do intros?
Yeah.
Just
Hey everyone, I'm Sam Girt. I'm a recent grad from IUP Computer Science. I've been doing freelance React Native and consulting now for about 2 years. So just wanted to bring my friend Marissa here, who's also a graphic designer, and kind of get her kind of acquainted with different frameworks. But
I've been doing web dev stuff on the side for almost a decade, but I don't really know anything about React, and it's hard to get into it without knowing anybody or knowing any of the software stuff.
I'm Jeff Hopper. I've been consulting other things for like 30 years. So I've been through lots of frameworks and languages, and I really like being in React these days. Not using it where I work currently at Coactive. It's JavaScript world there, but I work with React at this point. But I've done it in the past, and I'm really interested in how Vue compares. Also did the first version of Angular, which I drew out as soon as that project was over.
My name is Austin Kim, and I'm a graduate from Untitled Chapter here. And I've recently just started working for the same company that Jeff works for. It's called Collective, and I have probably a couple of weeks, months worth of experience in Angular, a little bit more in React.
Okay. Is that everybody? All right. All right, so this is our presentation. React versus Angular versus Vue. Sounds very competitive. What you will find is that I will hesitate to declare a winner though. So if you're looking for the too long didn't read, I like React, but I will not say that anyone is better than another. If you catch me afterwards, I can tell you why React is awesome. But I'm going to try to stay like objective and just present to you what each one is, the differences, and how they came to be also. So we're going to start with the problem they solve. We're going to do a little history lesson and why they even exist. Then we'll do some high-level differences. So like in terms of the projects, like how were they founded, what are the big differences between them, why you might choose one or the other, even though they kind of do all the same thing. Then we'll do a demo, and this is, I did not trust myself to live code Vue and Angular, so this is pre-done demo stuff, but I'll show you all the code, and I will show you, I'm going to walk through each one kind of like I'm giving a beginner tutorial in it. So if you're a beginner, then that'll be great. And then after you see that, then I'll go into the low-level differences. So you'll kind of see the demo before I even talk about some of the things that you just saw. All right, so this is React, Angular, and Vue. I'll use blue, red, and green throughout the presentation to kind of talk about them. And at a high level, what they all do is they make writing complex JavaScript web applications easier. Before this, it was harder. We'll show why. And now it's kind of easier. We'll talk about the different ways they do that. So, for example, you can have a single page app, which means your app never changes the browser bar unless you push state to history. So it's a single page app where you load the whole thing at once. Or you can use Vue or React on individual pages. So you don't need to use a single page app for those. We'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about and then we'll do the demo on each one of the three. So first, a history lesson. All right, in the beginning, there was HTML. And this was probably like late 90s or something, and HTML is all there was, and it was great. You hit a page, and you got what you wanted, and then you go to the next page. And that was what the web was. Then at some point, CSS happened, and so now you hit an HTML page, and it goes and fetches CSS, which changes the way the HTML is displayed. Still static, though, so you go to one page, you see what's on it, you go to the next page, you see what's on it. Nothing changes. Then we start getting some JavaScript. And JavaScript is kind of sprinkled in the HTML pages. You might remember this is called DHTML, dynamic HTML. There's lots of, it was a weird time. But we get JavaScript sprinkled into HTML pages, and it's basically for like hiding and showing things and making fun things animate. That's pretty much what JavaScript was used for at the beginning. Then people said all these browsers are stupid, and so we get jQuery. And jQuery basically lets you write JavaScript without worrying about what browser you're on, which is really nice. It also allows you to easily do Ajax, and so this is kind of when Ajax started to become a thing. And so now you could get the first like web applications that don't look like just hitting a page and going to the next page. Instead, what you hit a page, you use jQuery to do some Ajax to a backend, and then you update the HTML on your page to do something dynamic. Eventually people, so this is how it was, eventually people said jQuery and JavaScript in HTML isn't great, so let's split it out. So now we have our HTML pages, still mostly HTML. We have CSS, and then we have some JavaScript and jQuery, and this is kind of our separation of concerns. This is where we typically get, this is what we typically meant when we said separation of concerns. Eventually we started losing a little bit of that HTML and getting a little more jQuery, so that's the difference between these two. A little more JavaScript heavy. Losing a little of the CSS, and we may be able to put some of that into some JavaScript module type things. This is when we start getting template kind of things going on. And eventually we, at some point, just dropped jQuery. Everyone decided jQuery, we don't need it anymore, so we just have JavaScript. And this would be like modern browsers once they started getting good enough. Now we start having more and more JavaScript, less and less HTML and CSS, and JavaScript can start doing everything for us. And now this is about where we are. We have lots and lots of JavaScript. HTML and CSS are kind of secondary. And so this is the modern state of web applications now. So to handle that mass of JavaScript, we got 3 frameworks. And these are not the first ones. So before this we had Backbone, Knockout. There's a whole list of frameworks we had before these, but these are kind of the winners of the modern frameworks. It started with Angular, actually, 2010. That was V1. So if you hear people talk about the difference between V1 and V2, Angular went through a huge shift when they went from V1 to V2, and so Angular V1 is old Angular, and basically everyone hates it now. And Angular V2 is new Angular. I don't think 2016 is actually, 2016 the right year?
Sounds right.
Okay, 2016 is right here. So since then it's been Angular 2, and now it's up to 7, which everyone likes a lot better. Anyway, React actually started at Facebook in 2011, but they didn't open source it until 2013. And so React was written by Facebook. Facebook and Instagram were the 2 heaviest users at the beginning. Angular was written by Google, and then Vue was written basically as a response to Angular, written more like React. That's kind of it borrowed things from React and Angular, written by someone named Evan Yu. He was an engineer at Google, and he left to write Vue. So what you'll find when I start talking about the differences and who uses them and what you can use them for, they're really influenced by where they came from. So React, written by Facebook, is used by a lot of startups. It's used, it is very modular. It's meant to, you can move really fast in it. Angular, written by Google, is often used by bigger companies. It is a big framework. You have to learn a lot to get going with it. And Vue is kind of, if you don't like React or Angular for some reason, then you'll use Vue. It's kind of right in between them, it doesn't have the big company support that Angular or React does, which kind of means it's used probably third, which we'll see in a minute. So here's a few ways to figure out how big they are. From GitHub stars, actually Vue is the biggest, and I see this kind of as a response to how it came out. Everyone was like, hey, sweet, something that's not React or Angular, and they started. But if you look at weekly downloads, React is about double Angular, which is about double Vue. So that is, now weekly downloads is a little, these aren't individual people that downloaded it. This is every time something is npm installed with this, that counts as a download number. All right, so let's look at the web pages for the three and see what we can find out. React says it's a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. And so there's a few important words in there. One is library. React is very careful to call themselves a library, not a framework. And you'll see an instance of this later. So they don't have, for example, like routing included. Instead, you have to add on a bunch of your other libraries to make up an entire web application. Also, they call it user interfaces. So this is not meant to be like models in your browser. This is just meant to be a view layer. So you have to figure out how you're going to handle business logic. You have to figure out how you're going to share that across multiple views, for example. So in that way, React is kind of the smallest core. You'll see it's declarative. What that means is that you have your data, and you run it through your render function. So every component has a render function. You run it through your render function, and you know what the output is going to be based on what data you have. So it is not, you don't mutate your data, meaning you don't go back and change it. Instead, whatever your data is, runs through your function, and then you know what the output is going to be. Component-based, you'll see that they're all component-based. But this just means like if you make a button once, you shouldn't have to make that button again. You can just import it, reuse it as a component, essentially. And learn once, write everywhere talks about React Native, which we'll talk about in a couple slides. It means that you can use this both for the web and for native code. All right, Angular. Angular is one framework, mobile and desktop. So this is opposite of React. Angular says we're not just a library, we are an entire framework. And so when you get Angular, you get everything. You get routing, you get forms, you get lots of stuff. They want it to be that way. They want you to do it the Angular way. It's kind of like when Rails first came out and they had a bunch of conventions. Angular's trying to do the same thing. They have a lot of conventions for how they want you to write code. They also talk about mobile and desktop. So they can work on mobile and desktop, and we'll see how in a couple slides. And then we have Vue. Vue is the progressive JavaScript framework. And they don't mean progressive like forward thinking. They mean progressive like you can use it in a very small spot, and then you can expand from there. Or you can make a full single page application. So you can go anywhere from just using it in one little tiny place all the way to a single page application. When they talk about approachable, you can really see it like in their documentation. If you just run through their getting started guide, like they start with like a super simple example. And so they really want to have like the lowest learning curve of all three. Versatile and performant. So versatile, you can use it, you don't have to just use it as a single page application, and then you can also use it on mobile, like we'll see. And then performant, it is actually the smallest of the three, and it runs the fastest, although you'll see some benchmarks. It kind of doesn't matter, but it is actually the fastest. All right, so this is kind of the picture of the world that you get. If you go with Angular, you get Angular. It is a big framework. You do it their way. There are libraries you can put on top of it. There are choices you can make, but for the most part, you get Angular. If you go with React, you have React core, but then you have lots of little framework or libraries that you can bolt onto it. Routing and Redux or not, and there's like a million ways to do things. It's exactly what Angular doesn't want to be. It happens to be one of the reasons I like it, but and then Vue is somewhere in the middle. You get some things with Vue, but there are also other things that you may have to bolt on. You can also use it. You can use it more easily in just a small part of your application. than Angular, especially. And so that's why it looks like that. All right. So this is my very super scientific learning curve, meaning I just made it up, but I think it's about right. Vue, when they were saying approachable, like they weren't kidding. I learned Vue in like an hour just looking at it. And so it starts off really easy. Now eventually it can get complicated. You can do lots of complicated things with Vue, but it starts off really easily, and I've heard that from a lot of different people. That's why they like Vue instead of React or Angular, is because it's just so easy to get started. Angular, on the other hand, is really complicated. I'm going to show you a demo of Angular code. I still don't know that I understand it all, and I spent several hours on it. It's tricky. I think it's just because there's a lot of things that aren't quite standard. They use dependency injection, they use decorators, they use lots of things, and it can be really complicated to figure out what's going on. I have heard that once you know everything that's going on, it becomes easier though. But I've also heard the reason it's higher than the other two is because I've heard that it's still tricky, because you have so many pieces to the core library, it's still tricky to handle, even at scale. There is a reason, though, that big companies like it, and it's because it is really good at making really big applications that you can split into multiple parts. I mean, it's really good at that. But it's harder to learn. Okay, React is about, we'll say medium to learn, whatever that means. And then I have kind of a plateau. And that's because when you do React, you can get into it really easily, we'll see. And you can just use like set state and everything, like we'll see. But at some point, you probably want to add routing, and you probably want to add something like Redux or context or MobX or GraphQL or something. And all these and somethings really ramp up the learning curve. So you can hang out here in this plateau for a lot. You can do a lot in that plateau. But eventually, for real application, you're going to want to go up the hill, the next hill. And then at the end, I have React finishing the lowest. And that might be people who like Vue or Angular may quarrel with me on that. We'll see. I think React does a lot of things that are just JavaScript and just functions. And if you don't know what those mean, that's fine. But in the end, what you're doing in the end is just JavaScript. Whereas Angular and Vue have bits of magic, especially in the attributes, that just make it feel more complicated to me. That may be because I haven't been doing it as long, but I like React a lot because everything is just JavaScript, including JSX, which a lot of people hate, but it's also just JavaScript. All right. Let's talk about some benchmarks. These are not mine. These are done by Free Code Camp. Links there, and I'll post these slides somewhere so you can get that link if you want. So transfer size. So this is how big the base is, and this is not comparing. If it was just comparing like React core with Angular core, it would be way off base. I think they used a React Redux application and a Vue application with some state management. So you'll see React plus Redux is about the middle, Angular is by far the biggest, and Vue is the smallest. But if you, again though, within some margin of error, like if you really cared about it, then you might use one of those two, right? Same with the first meaningful paint. So this is the first time something gets drawn on the screen. You'll see Vue and React Redux about tie, and then Angular takes longer. Again, though, this is the difference between 3 seconds and 4 seconds. So like waiting an extra second may or may not be a big deal. For what it's worth, if it is a big deal, then you probably want to look at server-side rendering. Each of these supports some version of server-side rendering. So if you want SEO benefits, or you want really fast first paint, and then you want to progressively fill that in dynamically, then look at server-side rendering, which just means you render the page before you send it, and the browser can draw it a lot faster the first time. All right, let's talk about mobile a little bit. For React, the answer is pretty clear. You use React Native. You can, I guess, use NativeScript, but I don't think many people do that. You use React Native. For Vue or Angular, you can use NativeScript. React Native and NativeScript are, they both use native components. So this is not like a web view, which is what Ionic is. So if you, whenever you use a web view as a native app, you get a performance hit. There's a performance penalty. So if you're looking at native applications, I would look at React Native for React or NativeScript for Vue or Angular. Ionic will feel more like web dev, but you get a performance hit. Now maybe it doesn't matter for your use case, in which case that's fine. but React Native and NativeScript are the two I work with. And then there's one called Wex or Weeks. I guess Vue has an official partner with them. They came out of Alibaba. I know almost nothing about them though, but I thought I'd put them up there because apparently they're the official mobile partner of Vue. So I guess you can look into them, but Vue also works in NativeScript, and I think there's a lot of good support for NativeScript. So, okay, now we're into a demo. Before we go into a demo, does anyone have questions about any of the stuff that we talked about? Cool. All right, for our demo, we are going to make a to-do list because that's what everybody makes. So sorry if you're bored about to-do lists. But that's what we're going to do. So we're going to go React, Vue, and then Angular. It's the exact same functionality, but you'll see a lot of differences. For React and Vue, I chose to do this progressive style. So I did not do a single-page app, or what you would call a single-page app for React or Vue. But I had to for Angular because Angular only supports that, right? Instead, what I did is, so this is the, so I'll show you the React code first. So first we start with 3 script tags. We have React in development, we have React DOM, and we have Babel. So what React is going to do is React will give us all of our virtual DOM stuff, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and all of our important core functionality. React DOM is what tells React basically how to render to a browser. So the difference between browser and native is React DOM basically gets replaced with something that knows how to render to a phone. And then we're using Babel because that allows us to use JSX and arrow functions and all the fun ES6 stuff that we might want to use. All right, the first thing you'll notice for React is that we have a single div on the page. So this is what I was talking about, like you have almost no HTML, and everything else is going to be JavaScript. And then we load our application as Babel. And this is, I'm running a little local web server that lets me do this. And so this is all the HTML in the entire application for React. This is different than Vue or Angular, which actually do use HTML, which we'll see. But instead, everything else is JavaScript. Okay, if we go to React.js, so this is what gets loaded. Okay, and we'll start from the bottom. So this is, if you see this, looks like HTML in JavaScript. This is JSX. It is actually JavaScript. It's not HTML. And it's not outputting HTML. It's actually doing DOM manipulation. So it's actually going to change the browser when this stuff gets rendered. But what we have is we first get our root. So that is the only HTML element that we have on the page. And we're going to render something called to-do list. To-do list we define as a component. So this is what it means when it means it's componentized, everything's a component. This is a component. And the important thing for React is that we're going to have state. In more modern or functional ways of writing React, you may not see state at all. But the traditional, so this is kind of like the plateau thing. So using state is the way you get to the first plateau. And I still use state a lot also, even after I know Redux and more things. But if you want to share data across your application, if you want to have more functional programming type stuff, then you see state less and less. But state is basically everything that's going to change in our application. Then, so this is a class, by the way. And then everything, and then we have class methods here, and we'll go back and talk about those. And then our special method is render. So every component has a render method, and that tells it exactly what to output based on the state that we have. So our state is going to change, it's going to run through render, and then it's going to display exactly what we tell it to. And then we're going to, in our render method, we're going to return something that looks like HTML. It's not HTML, but you can think of it like HTML. We have all the normal tags. So here's an H4, so that's going to render like a normal H4. And then here's our input. Here's our button. And here is us rendering the list. So let's go through each one of those. We'll start with the list. Or how about I start with showing you how that thing works. So you have a to-do list. You can add things, like another thing. You can add it to the list, and then you can remove them one by one. And it's doing it all locally. So if I refresh this, it goes back. There's no server or anything. So let's start with how we look at the list. Inside of our render method, we have these curly braces, and these are going to tell it that we're about to do some JavaScript. So inside of our curly braces here, we can do any JavaScript we want, and we're going to start by accessing this .state.to-do list. So it's important that I said that this is a class, because the this in the render refers to the class. State refers to our state in the class, and then to-do list will access the key to-do list on state. We can map over those just like regular JavaScript, and for each one we're going to return a to-do item. And this is again what it talks about when it means it's componentized, because up here I have defined to-do item. To-do item is, in this case, just a function, but it could be a class. And it takes an item and an onRemove callback. And these are called props. So it has no state itself. So nothing will be changing when this gets rendered. It's only, the way it looks is only based on the prompts. Each item is going to be a row of this to-do list. So when I say item.text, I get the item 1 here, item 1, item 2, item 3. And then I'm displaying a button, and that's each one of these remove buttons. And on the click, I'm going to call the onRemove prop, passing in the item. So when I say to do item here, and I pass in the item that I have in my map, and the onRemove, which is this .onRemove. So let's go look at that. And this is how we first see how we change data in a React application. So we can't, in React, it's very important that you don't just say something like this.state.to-do list equals whatever. It's very important you don't do that. That's mutating the data, or that's mutating the state, and it will not automatically re-render. The beauty of React is that if you use setState to change your data, it will automatically call render again. You don't have to do it. In fact, don't call render ever. If you are, then you're probably doing something wrong. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to set state. We're going to set a new to-do list state. And if we're removing it, we're just going to filter out whatever the one is that we're just removing. So we're returning a new array, setting it into to-do list. And when we do that, so when I click remove, it's going to do this. It'll say, show me everything but filter out this one. And you can see it goes away instantly. So it automatically re-renders, automatically pushes it to the page. Now something that React, Vue, and Angular all do is intelligent diffing. Yeah. So they don't just like shove the new application every single time it renders. That would be extremely inefficient. And that's what, in the history lesson with all that jQuery, that's kind of what a lot of those applications did, and it was really slow and bad. What this does is it says, your whole application's fine, all you have to do is remove this one line. That's what it does. We'll see the same thing for Vue and Angular. If you already know React, it's kind of an intro lesson, but it's important for beginners, so hopefully it makes sense. All right, and then the last thing is adding items. So we have an input here, and what we're going to do with this input is do something called a controlled component. So previously, like 5 years ago, if I type in this box here, the only place that this value, let's say ASDF, so I can actually say ASDF, the only place that lives, or used to live, would be in the doc. So you type it into the input, and it lived on the page, and if you wanted to get the value of that, you have to use jQuery or something to go say, hey, input, what is your value? That's how you used to do it. With React, what we do now is something called controlled components. You don't have to do it this way, but this is the way you should probably do it. And so what we're doing each time is we're setting the value of this input explicitly by calling this.state.message. So that starts with just a blank string. And every time someone types in a button, types in a key, onChange is called. We get this is the raw HTML event, or the browser event. And we're going to call setState, setting our message to the e.target.value, which is the value that the browser event is giving us, so that every time we hit a button, we get the new value that's in that state, and we're setting it to message. This is an important difference, because then when we call add item, instead of going to the input and like asking for its value, what we can do is we can say the text of the new item is just this.state.message. We know that the value in state represents the actual value of the thing. The other thing that we can do because of this is if we wanted to, for example, for some reason, put this value like here, we could call this.state.message. And now when we type in here, it's mirrored exactly. This is not two-way binding, so this is not what Angular 1 did. This is, I hit a button, it calls on change, which sets the message, which triggers a re-render, which says this value is different than it was before, go update it in the DOM. So that's this one-way binding. So you do something, set state, triggers a re-render, and that's the flow that we have. All right, same thing for add item. So we set a state, and instead of saying like this.state.todolist.push, don't do that in React. Instead, we're setting a new to-do list, which is, this is an array completion, is that the word for it, in ESX? So we're saying get all the to-do lists that we have right now and add a new object. So this to-do list is a new array instead of just mutating the old array, which is important. All right, so that is React, super fast. Does anybody have any questions about super fast React? Yeah.
Just a question for the DOM input. Why would you set that all the way to the bottom of the code? Is there a reason, or can you?
Like here?
No, all the way to the bottom. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, this one. Oh, no. Okay, so this is, yeah, I should explain this. This is mostly because it's just all one, I just did this all on one page. Usually you'd have it split up in multiple files and stuff, and so this would be like your entryway into the file. So it'd be, this is usually like off in its own file, just as this thing. It's at the bottom because I want a to-do list to exist, and I defined it up here. So, and I'm using it down here. So that's the reason it's
calling back. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So when we get to Angular, you'll see it more split out. And if you use create React app to make a single page React app, then what you'll see is exactly that. So this is basically in its own file, and every component is in its own file. Yeah.
The to-do item component at the top, is that just to show that it's a component based?
Yeah, exactly. So I could have, like right here, I could have just done item.text or whatever. Yeah. But instead I returned a whole component. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just to show that it's component based. I do the same thing in Vue. And in Vue it's a little more interesting because there's a template, and then the same thing in Angular. And yeah. You'll often see, so sometimes in a map you'll see just raw HTML here, but you'll often see a single component being returned. This is kind of a common pattern. Any other questions? All right, cool. Let's go on to Vue. So Vue, not a big surprise, has the exact same functionality, so we can add stuff and we can remove it. So let's see how that works. For Vue, I chose the same approach, so all one file. And the only thing that we're going to import for Vue is Vue.js. That includes essentially React DOM, and we don't use any fancy Babel stuff, so I didn't need that. All right, the first thing that you'll notice about Vue is our HTML is much bigger than React. We have more than just one div. And that's because Vue uses actual HTML. And that's one thing that they really wanted to do, is use actual HTML components instead of JSX, like fake HTML. Yeah. The thing you will, so we have the same thing. We have an H4, we have an input, a button, and then a list of things. Some big differences though. One is these funny attributes. This is how both Vue and Angular deal with being dynamic, basically. And what you'll see when we get down here is each one of these references something in JavaScript. So saying vModel, so we're gonna look for something called message. vOnClick, add item, so there's gonna be a function called add item somewhere. And then for loops, you have this for loop inside of attributes. So item and index in sorted list. So instead of like in curly braces doing this, we're going to have a for loop in here. Here's bind, and so this we're going to see is it's like two-way binding, but it's not. It's actually one-way binding. But we're basically setting a key and something called to do for each iteration of the loop. And then we're saying on remove, which is going to be another button that we click, where this is JavaScript that's actually going to run. And then we put the whole thing in something called a to-do item, which is how they do components. So this is an actual web component, and we're going to define it down here. So we will start, you'll see it's shorter, by the way. This is one of the things about that they say it's more accessible. The code is actually shorter, which I was kind of surprised by. I don't know if that, anyone with Vue experience may want to chime in. I don't know if that really, like, in big applications, if the Vue code is smaller than React applications. I don't know, but it was interesting. Okay, so again, we'll start, this is the bottom of the file. We're going to make something called to-do app. And this is a new view. And so all of your things that you link to DOM elements are going to be new view things. And it basically, it's not a class, it's just an object that we're passing into this new view thing. So it's kind of like how old React did it. And the first thing we have is an element. And the element is going to be what we're going to link this application to. So if you look up here, this ID is to-do app. And the element we're linking to is to-do app. This means that you can have multiple Vue applications on the same page super easily. You can with React too, but this makes it like especially easy because you just link to whatever your thing is, and whatever your ID is, and you basically put the new Vue app into that DOM element. So that's kind of cool. All right, in our new Vue component class, it's not a class, component, we have something called data. So this is going to be like state. And in data, we have our message, our to-do list, which is an array of objects, and our next to-do ID, which is how we just keep incrementing the ID. And then we have two things down here, one called computed and one called methods. And some of the way I did this is just to show you multiple ways of doing things. We'll start with methods. So in methods, this is basically like class functions. And the this inside of here, the this inside of computed and in methods, is the Vue instance. And the first thing you'll notice is that instead of saying like this.state.whatever, we can just say this.to-do list. And that's because it takes everything in data here and just puts it on the object. So it makes it a little easier to access the stuff instead of remembering this.state or this.props or whatever. The second thing you'll notice is that when we add an item, we push. This is not what you want to do in React, but it's what you do in Vue. This is what they actually do is they overwrite they re-implement the six methods for array. So push, pop, shift, unshift, splice, and slice. And whenever you use any of those, you're using special Vue versions. And this is one-way data binding, not two-way data binding. And what you're actually doing is using the special Vue version, which basically re-renders the whole thing. So I thought that was kind of cool. That's one reason that they say it's approachable, because you're using push and pop and stuff just like you might normally do. So for add item, for example, we push a new item onto the to-do list, we increment the ID, and then we set the message to empty string. I'm showing you one so these are just regular methods. I'm showing you one computed method. Computed is like methods except they're cached. So they only get run once the first time, and then the value is cached. So you can do really big, expensive things in here, like sorting a list, which you may not want to do every single render. You can just do it once, values cached, and so that's what I'm doing here. Is I'm sorting the list, and I wasn't going to do this, but Vue kept changing the order of my list, and I wasn't sure why, and so I just made a computed thing that was sorted. So for some reason, this for loop did not return the same order each time, and I'm very confused by that. So anyway, I made a sorted computed method, and so now I'm iterating through that, and now it works just fine. Some things like that are why it's like there's a little bit of magic going on with this weird v4 attribute.
Was it always random?
What?
Was it always random when it, or could you find any kind of pattern?
I couldn't find any pattern. It was like this, like my array is just an array. So I just didn't know. I don't know. Maybe if I was, maybe if I knew more Vue, I'd be like, oh yeah, I didn't set the whatever. But couldn't figure it out. Okay, now let's look at templates. So one thing that Vue does, Vue and Angular both have templates, and React doesn't. And so I make this new to-do item component here. The props that it accepts is to-do. So up here, when I bind to-do to item, what this is doing is this is taking this item, so in my for loop, binding it to something called to-do, and passing it to a component to-do item, which is defined by this string right here. So, so what it's doing is passing the item in as a prop called to-do, which I can then access right in here. And what we have is a template. Templates aren't always strings. They can be, there's lots of ways you can do templates. In fact, you can use JSX with Vue, but the simplest way is just a string template like you might be used to in like old style stuff. Like this is kind of like a mustache, right? Two things. So in my template is just a list element. Here's my to-do, which comes in as a prop, and I don't have to say this.props.to-do, I just say to-do. Inside of these double curly braces, which means it will be evaluated. And then I have a button, and inside of my template, I have another Vue attribute called vOn, click, and I'm going to emit something called remove. And remove, and so that's what I said up here. So this is where remove is up here. So on remove, so when I emit remove in my template, it's going to do this thing, which is going to splice out the item that I just emitted the thing on. So I did that. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was interesting. Any questions about basic Vue? Yeah.
For the components, I would assume you could break that out, similar to Angular with the template URL. You could break the components HTML.
Yep. Yeah, you can do complicated things with templates. I don't know exactly how you break it out. I don't know if you just put a file name here or something, but yes, you don't have to do it as a string. Because when I first did this, I was like, oh, I don't like putting, like I have to backtick that. I don't like that. But there are ways to not do that. So, yeah.
So I guess the index comes from the for loop, which was higher or something?
Right here,
So
yep.
I guess it must all kind of know, all right, there's a bunch of things that are executing that,
Yeah, that threw me for a loop too, because it's sort of hiding the for loop for you. Like you have the for loop defined on the component that you're returning each for loop, which is a little backwards to me, but yeah, exactly. All right, let's go to Angular. All right, for Angular, same thing, although without the initial ones. You can add and remove stuff. Except you'll see that Vue is one file and Angular is 6 files. So let's go look at the 6 Angular files. So the first thing is you cannot do, as far as I know, with Angular, the thing that I showed you with React and with Vue, which is you can't just have a single page that you load up that does its thing. Instead, I guess you have to use the Angular CLI to make a new single page application. Maybe that's wrong, but that's what I got. And Angular, because of its learning curve, I definitely was pretty unsure when I was doing it. And so a lot of what I'm going to show you is based on the SitePoint Angular 2 tutorial. So it's a pretty good one. You can go check it out. All right, so here is our entry point into the application. This will be a lot like, that's basically what this is doing here. So this is like the entry point into the React application. Here's the entry point into the Angular application. This, by the way, is what it would look like if you split the React application into multiple things. You have to import React, you have to import whatever. Okay. And the first thing you'll notice is that we have decorators here. So this is like, you gotta learn a lot of things before you know React. You have to learn what decorators are, and I mean, you have to know at least to use them, right? And we pass several things. These aren't super important, but we can import different things. You'll notice like we have forms that come from Angular. That's different. React doesn't have that. But the important thing is we go to a component, and this is our root component. So let's go there. In Angular, we're going to define our component, again with the decorator. And so this is what you were talking about with splitting out the template. So it has templates also, and we're going to split it, and we're going to look at that in a second. It also has CSS that's specific for that template, which is that's nice. That means you don't have to worry about CSS overwriting each other's and stuff. And then we have a selector, just like our other ones. So we're going to go look for the app root and put this application into that. Inside our component, we have our add to do function and our remove to do function and our to dos function, which is going to get all the to dos. But what's different about this one is that we have something called a service. What's also different is that this is written in TypeScript, not JavaScript. You don't have to use all like the types, but it's built in for you. It does it all for you. So when you see colon to do service, and you see, we'll see some more later, like that's TypeScript. Okay, so we have this to do service, which is doing everything for us. So let's go look at that. This is injected, so it's another thing you have to worry about, like what does injectable mean, right? But it's injected and injectable, and it does basically the same things that we did in the other place, or in the other two applications. So we have a number. When we add it to do, we set its ID. Here's this push again. This is like views push, not like a mutating push, as far as I understand. This is not two-way bound, although it might be. So I was kind of confused because there's two-way binding in Angular, but not built in unless you use RxJS. This is all stuff that confused me with Angular. So anyway, but it's basically the same. This is just all on a separate file. And you'll see that it's pulled out because this is where you do your HTTP post or whatever. Same with delete, same with put. So you can see that Angular is really built with this in mind. Like you're going to have separate places where you do your things. It really wants you to break your application up a certain way, which is really nice for big teams. That's why it's popular with big companies, because you do the same thing every time. You do it in the same place, in the same way. Whereas with React, like based on whatever libraries you add, who knows what you might have in there. Okay, but this is basically all the same stuff that we had in the other applications. Here's our template. It's going to look a lot like the view one, including some fancy attributes. So the attributes are really similar to views. They're a little different, but really similar. So let's go through a couple of these. One is ng model. This is two-way binding. So this is binding new to do.title, and this is basically to this input value, and this is basically doing what we manually did in React. So this is saying set the value to this, and when it changes, change the value in new to do. Then let's see, we have on click, do something. So this add to do, this comes from our component, which then forwards it off to the service. And then we have the same kind of for loop thing. So we say for to do of to dos, and then do this thing. And inside our template, we have the same kind of handlebar style templating. And then on click, remove to do to dos, and then this is called on the component. So you can kind of see how I'm getting near the end. So you can kind of see how Angular is built to be this big thing that's used in big companies. It has templates. It has some two-way binding if you want to use it, but apparently one-way binding for most of the other stuff. It has HTML, so you're actually using HTML elements. This is the actual to-do item. That's not that important. It's just a to-do item. And then Vue took a lot of that. So Evan Yu came from Google, and he wrote Vue. And so Vue took a lot of that, but they also took a lot from React, which is start really small. It doesn't have quite all the magic that Angular does. And React is sort of totally by itself, separate from the other two, in terms of it is declarative. It is definitely one-way binding. It does not use HTML attributes, like it doesn't use fancy web components. It uses JSX, which is JavaScript that will change your DOM for you. And so React kind of off by itself, Angular kind of off by itself. Vue is somewhere in the middle. I would say closer to Angular than React, but there you go. All right, so this is my last slide, and I'm just going to quickly go through a lot of the stuff that we just saw, basically. So in React and Vue, you're just using regular JavaScript. You can use TypeScript if you want, but in Angular, TypeScript is the default. And most places use TypeScript. All the libraries are in TypeScript, and so like you get all your types for you. Whereas if you use TypeScript in React, for example, not everything has types. Not everyone uses types. So if you like TypeScript, maybe go with Angular. In React, we use JSX. It's not HTML in JavaScript. It actually does DOM manipulation things. Whereas in Vue, you can use HTML, actual HTML elements and templates, or you can also use JSX. There's a way to do that. And then in Angular, it is HTML and templates. React and Vue are both progressive in the sense that you can use them in a small little spot, and then you can expand all the way out to a single page application if you want. Whereas Angular is just a single page application, as far as I can see. React and Vue, this is a little less important, but it's an interesting. React and Vue both use a virtual DOM, but Angular uses direct DOM. They're all three really fast, but Angular uses the direct DOM instead of virtual DOM implementation, so I thought that was interesting. React is definitely one-way binding. Vue is one-way with a star, because you can kind of do some two-way stuff. And Angular is, so it's two-way data, especially if you use observables, though the stuff I was reading says it's one-way by default, but then everyone uses ng model. So I was a little confused by all that, but you will see more two-way binding stuff for sure in Angular than the other two. That's it. Does anyone have any questions? Yep.
Direct DOM, I hadn't heard that terminology before. Is that just your standard vanilla JavaScript DOM manipulation?
Yeah, so from what I gather, and I hadn't heard it until I came across it either, so what they do is when they get an update, they take a snapshot of the DOM, I think, and then they do diffing on that, basically, which is different than virtual DOM, which is you keep two versions of the DOM in your memory at all times. So I think what that gives you is you can, like, anytime you change something in the DOM, Angular will pick up on it, I guess, when it does the direct DOM. I don't know. Someone who knows more Angular than I may be able to explain that better, but it was an interesting difference. Any other questions? All right. Yeah.
I just want to point out, you can absolutely do the single file thing in Angular.
Can you really? So I was trying to figure that out.
It's definitely not the golden path, though.
Okay.
I appreciate you laying it out.
I was trying to
more
figure that,
golden path-ish.
I was trying to figure that out, and I couldn't. So.
Angular seemed like a lot more work to get something that you could do much simpler in React or Vue.
I think so. Yeah. That was my sense anyway. Angular is a lot more work, but it comes with a lot more like. That comes with batteries included. So like you want to do something, it's there. Like it has a way to do it, and including like form stuff, which is just a pain sometimes. Like Angular has form stuff. Yeah. I will not be here next month because I'm at a conference, so I need someone to host. If anyone wants to host, I will try to find a speaker for you, whatever. So you can email me here or talk to me afterwards, or I will come find some of you. But if someone wants to host next month, that'd be awesome. Otherwise, thanks for coming. Take some pizza.